No one in that restaurant thought anything unusual was about to happen. Not the couples enjoying their dinner. Not the waiters moving between tables with practiced smiles. Not even the man who was about to cross a line he couldn't take back. It was one of those places where everything feels controlled. Soft lighting, low music, the quiet clink of cutlery against porcelain. Conversations stayed polite. Voices stayed low. Nothing here ever turned into a scene. That's why no one noticed the tension at first. It started small. Almost harmless. A laugh that was a little too loud. A comment that didn't quite belong at a dinner table. Most people ignored it. They always do. When you're surrounded by comfort, you assume discomfort will pass on its own. At one corner table sat a man with long dark hair, dressed simply, eating slowly. He didn't look important. He didn't look dangerous. Just another guest enjoying his meal with a woman beside him. No one recognized him. That was the mistake. A man from a nearby table leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, confidence fueled by noise and attention. He glanced over once. Then again. His eyes lingered a second too long. He smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that looks for reaction. Still, nothing happened. The man at the corner table didn't respond. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge the attention. Silence. And silence, to the wrong person, feels like permission. The comment came again. Louder this time. Sharp enough to carry across the room. A few heads turned. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The woman at the corner table paused mid-bite. The man beside her slowly set his fork down. That single movement, small, controlled, went unnoticed by almost everyone. But something had already changed. The air felt heavier. Conversations lost their rhythm. A waiter slowed his steps without realizing why. The man who had made the comment smirked, encouraged by the lack of resistance. He leaned forward, clearly enjoying the moment. He had no idea who he was provoking. Because if he had known, he would have stayed seated. He would have lowered his voice. He would have minded his own business. But he didn't know. He didn't know that the calm man across the room was Steven Seagal. And he didn't know that some people don't need to raise their voices to completely control a room. The restaurant was the kind of place people chose when they wanted peace. Warm amber lights softened every corner of the room, reflecting gently off polished tables and glassware. The music was low, carefully selected jazz that never demanded attention, only filled the silence. Conversations blended into a steady hum, calm and predictable. It was the sort of environment where problems didn't belong. Waiters moved with quiet confidence, balancing trays effortlessly, their footsteps nearly silent against the carpet. Couples leaned toward each other, speaking in half-whispers. Friends laughed softly, mindful of the space they shared with strangers. Everything followed an unspoken rule: keep things pleasant. At one corner table, partially shielded by a decorative divider, Steven Seagal sat with his partner. He was dressed simply. Dark shirt, relaxed posture, no jewelry, nothing that hinted at status or celebrity. To anyone glancing his way, he looked like just another middle-aged man enjoying dinner. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Steven ate slowly, deliberately. Not rushed. Not distracted. He listened more than he spoke, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling. His movements were measured, controlled, as if even in rest he carried awareness. Across from him, his partner enjoyed the evening, unaware that a quiet shift had already begun somewhere else in the room. This was supposed to be a normal night. A break from public life. A moment of privacy. No cameras. No attention. Just food, conversation, and the rare comfort of anonymity. Around them, the restaurant carried on as usual. A birthday group toasted near the center of the room. Someone raised a glass too high and laughed, quickly lowering it when they realized others were watching. A waiter apologized softly for a delayed order. Another table debated dessert. Nothing felt wrong. Yet moments like this are often deceptive. Comfort creates blind spots. People relax when they believe nothing bad can happen. They assume everyone in the room shares the same boundaries, the same respect, the same sense of restraint. But not everyone does. At a table not far away, a man sat back in his chair, louder than the rest, enjoying the attention of those around him. His voice carried. His gestures were broad. He thrived on being noticed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't aggressive. Not yet. He was simply someone who enjoyed testing limits, especially in places where limits were rarely challenged. He noticed the quiet table in the corner. The woman first. Then the man beside her. Something about their calm drew his curiosity. They didn't react to the noise. They didn't look around. They didn't seek approval. That kind of stillness stood out. Steven, meanwhile, remained unaware, or appeared to be. He cut his food carefully. He chewed slowly. He placed his glass down with intention. His attention stayed at the table, not the room. But calm should never be mistaken for ignorance. Years of discipline had trained him to read environments without staring, to sense changes without obvious reaction. He registered the shift in energy long before anyone else did. A laugh that lingered too long. A pause in conversation. A subtle change in posture at another table. Still, he did nothing. Because at this stage, nothing had truly happened. The restaurant continued its quiet rhythm, unaware that it was standing on the edge of disruption. This is how most confrontations begin, not with shouting or violence, but with normality. With routine. With people assuming that the night will unfold exactly as planned. Steven remained seated, calm and unassuming, blending into the background of the room. No one watching would have guessed that beneath that calm exterior was a lifetime of control, training, and restraint. And no one, least of all the man who would soon speak out of turn, understood how fragile this peaceful moment really was. The first comment didn't stop the room. It slipped into the air almost unnoticed, half laughter, half sarcasm, blending into the background noise of the restaurant. A few people heard it but chose not to react. That's what most people do when something feels slightly wrong but not dangerous enough to address. At first, it sounded like a joke. A man at a nearby table leaned back in his chair, glass raised loosely in his hand. His voice carried farther than it should have, cutting through the soft music and polite conversation. Steven didn't look up. His partner paused for a brief second, then continued eating, telling herself it wasn't meant for them. That was the instinct, to minimize, to avoid escalation, to hope it would end on its own. It usually doesn't. The man laughed at his own comment. His friends chuckled along, encouraged by the sound of attention. He glanced around the room, checking who was watching, feeding off the moment. Then his eyes returned to the corner table. This time, he spoke again. Louder. Sharper. More personal. A few nearby conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Steven's partner lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. The warmth of the room seemed to cool just a little. Steven noticed everything. He noticed the change in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the subtle silence spreading outward like ripples. But he still didn't move. To the man across the room, that silence felt like victory. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, confidence growing with every second of non-response. In his mind, the lack of reaction meant weakness. It meant dominance. Audience question. Have you ever seen someone mistake silence for permission? The man spoke again. This time there was no mistaking it. His comment cut through the room, deliberate, disrespectful, meant to be heard. Heads turned fully now. Someone whispered, "That's not okay." But no one stood up. No one intervened. Because public spaces create shared responsibility, and shared responsibility often becomes no responsibility at all. Steven slowly set his fork down. The sound was soft, barely audible. But to those closest, it landed heavier than the comment itself. He turned his head just enough to look in the man's direction. Not aggressively. Not challengingly. Just acknowledgement. The man froze for half a second. Then he smirked. The smirk mattered. Because it showed that this was no longer accidental. This was intentional. He laughed again, louder now, fueled by the attention. He glanced at his friends, then back at Steven, as if daring him to react. Steven's partner shifted in her chair, uncomfortable, embarrassed, angry, but silent. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. She knew escalation could change everything. Stephen reached out and gently touched her hand. A simple gesture. A quiet reassurance. But his eyes never left the man. The room felt suspended between breaths. The man stood up. Chairs scraped against the floor. The sound snapped people fully into attention. A waiter stopped mid-step. Someone near the bar lowered their phone. The man took a step closer, still smiling, still playing to the room. "Relax," he said mockingly. "It's just a joke." But jokes don't make rooms go silent. Stephen stood as well. Slowly. Calmly. No sudden movement. No raised shoulders. No clenched fists. Just presence. The difference was immediate. The man's smile hesitated. Not gone, but thinner. Less confident. Stephen spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet. Even. Controlled. "You don't speak to her that way." That was it. No insult. No threat. No performance. The room held its breath. For a brief moment, the man had a choice. He could apologize. He could step back. He could sit down and let the night continue. But pride is a dangerous thing, especially when mixed with an audience. He scoffed. "Or what?" he said. The words echoed louder than he intended. Audience question. At this point, if you were watching, would you expect this to end peacefully? Stephen didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there, unmoving, his calm now unmistakable. That calm unsettled the man more than anger ever could. Because anger can be challenged. Calm can't. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something was about to change. The line had been crossed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But publicly. And once a line is crossed in front of witnesses, there's no going back. When someone openly disrespects another person in public, who do you think is responsible to stop it? Steven Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react like the movies make people believe he would. He simply stood there. The restaurant held its collective breath. Conversations had stopped. Forks hovered in the air. Waiters paused mid-step. Even the distant background music seemed to fade. This was a rare moment, one of those moments where a single decision could change everything. Stephen placed a hand gently over his partner's, a small gesture that carried more weight than any shout. "Stay calm," it seemed to say. "I've got this." Inside, a storm was brewing. Years of training, discipline, and experience surged in his mind. He could end this in seconds. Seconds. He could make the man regret every word, every smirk, every ounce of arrogance. And yet, he didn't. Because this wasn't about ego. This wasn't about proving who was stronger. This was about protection. This was about dignity. This was about keeping control when chaos was trying to force its way in. He thought of all the times he had been underestimated. All the times the world assumed his calm was weakness. And he knew that power without control is nothing but rage, and rage can ruin everything in seconds. He looked at the man again. His calm wasn't fragile. It wasn't hesitation. It was deliberate. Every muscle, every line of his body, radiated controlled readiness. The man's chest puffed up. His eyes flickered with the thrill of confrontation. He didn't know what he was truly facing. He didn't know that Stephen wasn't just calm, he was measured. Every movement calculated. Every reaction anticipated. Stephen's hand still rested lightly on his partner's. She felt the steadiness, the quiet certainty, the invisible shield that said, "Nothing will touch you while I'm here." The room felt suspended in time. Half a dozen invisible threads connected Stephen, his partner, the man provoking him, and the audience watching quietly from their tables. Every second stretched longer. Stephen could hear the slight rustle of the man's leather jacket, the shallow intake of breath before another insult. He could sense the tension coiling, waiting to snap. He also knew the choice he had to make. He could react aggressively. He could unleash years of discipline and skill to humiliate or injure. He could show the man and everyone else what happens when you misjudge someone like him. Or he could lead with restraint. Control would end the situation faster than anger ever could. Control would maintain dignity for everyone in the room, including the man about to cross the line. Stephen shifted slightly, standing fully now, just enough to make his presence undeniable. His partner remained behind him, still seated, trusting him completely. His eyes locked onto the man. Not with hatred, not with fear, not with challenge, but with expectation. "You don't speak to her that way," he said softly. The words were simple. No exaggeration. No performance. No loud threat. Just calm authority. The man laughed nervously, trying to regain the confidence he thought he had. "Or what?" he said, leaning closer. Steven didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Let the tension build. Let the room feel the gravity of the decision about to unfold. Every second the man waited, every breath he took, the choice was clear. Steven could end this. He could make the man pay for his arrogance. And yet, he didn't. Because the lesson wasn't in punishment. The lesson was in discipline. His hand squeezed his partner's gently. Not to warn, not to threaten, but to reassure. "Stay calm. Watch how it's done." The room noticed. The bystanders could feel the shift. Calm was now stronger than aggression. Presence was more powerful than noise. The man's smirk faltered. Doubt flickered across his face for the first time. This is the moment everyone watches in real-life confrontations. The moment you realize the quietest person in the room often holds the most power. Steven's mind weighed every possibility. What if the man escalated? What if he shoved? What if he lashed out physically? He had answers for all of it. But he didn't need to act yet. He could choose exactly how and when to respond. That choice, that restraint, is what separates those who are truly strong from those who think strength is loud, fast, or violent. The man took another step. Steven's eyes narrowed just slightly. Not in anger, but in measurement. Not in threat, but in precision. This is the moment, he thought. The moment when control will define the outcome, not rage. Every muscle in Steven's body was ready, poised, prepared. And yet, his outward demeanor remained calm. Controlled. Quiet. Imposing without effort. The restaurant held its collective breath. Forks hovered. Phones were raised. Eyes widened. Everyone instinctively knew the line was about to be crossed, and that what followed would define the night. Audience question. If you were standing there, watching someone provoke a calm man like this, would you step in, speak up, or silently hope it ends peacefully? This wasn't a moment for theatrics. It was a moment for choice. And in that quiet decision, in the pause before action, Steven showed something rare, the power of restraint. The smirk on the man's face didn't last long. He had expected silence to be weakness. He had expected the calm in Steven's eyes to be hesitation. But he had underestimated discipline. He leaned forward again, trying to reclaim control of the room. "Did I offend you, old man?" he sneered. The words carried across the table. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations stopped. Phones were raised. Even the bartender paused, tray in hand. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a sudden move. He simply stood, steady, unshaken, as if the air around him were a shield no aggression could penetrate. Audience question. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to intimidate you, and staying calm was harder than fighting back? The man stepped closer. His presence was meant to dominate, meant to provoke. He leaned in, invading personal space. Steven's hand remained lightly on his partner's, a quiet barrier, a silent message: do not cross this line. For a moment, doubt flickered in the man's eyes. It was subtle, but enough for Steven to notice. And then pride took over. He shoved Steven's shoulder. A quick, sharp motion, but enough to escalate everything. Gasps echoed across the room. Drinks wobbled. Chairs scraped. The restaurant collectively inhaled. Steven didn't stumble. He didn't lunge. He simply stepped back, just enough to shield his partner behind him. Not in fear, but in strategic positioning. The line had been crossed. The man's friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to intervene. They could feel the tension, could sense the quiet authority in the man they had mocked. The instigator took a step back, but not fully. He raised his hand again, as if daring Steven to act. Steven's eyes met his. Calm. Focused. Imposing without aggression. "You still have time," he said quietly. The man hesitated. A twitch in his jaw betrayed the uncertainty he was trying to mask. For a brief moment, the room was frozen in time. The only sound was the faint rustle of clothing and the shallow breaths of people realizing something unusual was happening. Audience question. Have you ever witnessed someone who didn't raise a fist but commanded the most respect? Then, with the precision only years of training can bring, Steven acted. Not with rage. Not with chaos. He moved. A single, smooth motion redirected the man's arm, just enough to break his balance without hurting him. The man stumbled back, shocked. Phones recorded the moment. Eyes widened. The air in the restaurant changed completely. Steven didn't chase him. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, breathing steadily. Calm. In control. "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped," he said. "You just need to be out of control." The friends of the man pulled him away, muttering apologies and excuses. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced with quiet regret. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Forks touched plates again. Music continued. Conversations resumed, but the tension remained, a quiet respect for what had just unfolded. Steven's partner leaned slightly against him, still shaken but safe. She realized the depth of the calm that had just protected her. Audience question. Would you have had the discipline to stay calm, knowing you could end it violently in seconds? The man who had started the confrontation sat back down, humiliated without a word being spoken. No cheers. No loud confrontation. No spectacle. Just quiet authority. The lesson was clear. Anger may look powerful, but control is what actually ends a confrontation. Steven returned to his seat, settled his napkin, and continued his meal as though nothing had happened. But the restaurant would remember. Everyone in the room would remember. Because in that moment, a lesson had been delivered, without a single punch thrown, without a single shout. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest, not the quickest, not the most aggressive. It is the one who protects what matters most without losing control. Final engagement question for this part. If you were witnessing this, what would you do? Step in, stay silent, or try to mediate? Would you have had the courage and the restraint to handle it like Steven? The smirk on the man's face was fading. Not gone, but faltering. He had thought he controlled the room. He had thought that loudness and arrogance were enough. He had been wrong. Steven Seagal stood there, calm, unshaken, every movement deliberate. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to throw a punch. The quiet authority radiating from him filled the space more than any action ever could. The man tried to regain his bravado. "That's what I thought," he said, forcing a laugh. No one laughed. The friends who had encouraged him shifted uncomfortably. They were starting to feel the invisible weight of control, the kind of presence that cannot be ignored. Steven didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the man. Eyes steady, unwavering, calm, but precise, calculating, and full of warning. "You still have time," he said quietly. The words weren't a threat. They were a choice. A clear opportunity to step back, to avoid humiliation, to avoid consequences. For a brief moment, the man considered it. His jaw tightened, his pride warring with his instinct to survive embarrassment. Audience question. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's calmness made you second-guess your actions? Would you take a step back or push forward? The man raised his hand again. Not fully, but enough to signal he might escalate. And in that instant, Steven acted. Not with anger. Not with aggression. Not with chaos. Years of discipline, precision, and anticipation guided his movements. In one smooth motion, he intercepted the man's arm. He redirected it gently but decisively, enough to break balance, enough to prevent a shove, but without striking a single blow. The man stumbled back. Shock and disbelief flashed across his face. The restaurant held its collective breath. Every diner, every staff member, every nearby table, all witnesses to what had just happened. Phones recorded. Eyes widened. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Steven didn't chase him. Didn't shout. didn't raise a finger in threat. He simply stood there, steady, breathing calmly, every movement controlled. "You don't need to be hurt to be stopped," he said, softly. "You just need to be out of control." The simplicity of the statement was disarming. No one expected such clarity. No one expected such power in silence. The man's friends pulled him away. His arrogance shattered. His confidence replaced by quiet regret. The restaurant slowly resumed its rhythm, but the tension lingered. Every person present could feel it. Something rare had just occurred. Steven's partner leaned slightly against him. Her hands were trembling, her pulse racing, but she was safe. She understood, in that quiet moment, the depth of the control and discipline standing between her and danger. Audience question. If you were watching this, would you believe that calm can be stronger than violence? Could you stay composed if the stakes were personal? No one cheered. No one clapped. No one celebrated in the usual way. The lesson wasn't about spectacle. It was about authority. About knowing exactly when to act, and when to let silence carry the weight of consequence. The strongest person in a room is not the loudest. Not the fastest. Not the most aggressive. The strongest person is the one who can protect what matters without losing control. Steven's calm had been more powerful than the man's arrogance. His discipline more intimidating than any shout could have been. Even those who had tried to provoke him now understood, without a word, that the balance of power had shifted entirely. Audience question. Think about your own life. When someone challenges you, either publicly or privately, do you react immediately? Or do you pause, assess, and choose the response that protects dignity and control? Steven turned back to his partner, a soft but reassuring glance. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, still shaken, but safe. By the time the restaurant returned to normal, the man who had caused the tension had learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. Control beats aggression every time. Not because he was physically stronger. Not because he was faster. Not because he struck first. Because he understood that authority, precision, and calm, combined with the willingness to act decisively, are the true measures of power. The diners would remember the night, not for a fight won or lost, but for the lesson silently delivered. Real strength isn't loud. Real strength isn't reaction. Real strength is discipline. Final engagement question for this part. If you were in the room, would you have the patience and calm to manage the situation like Steven? Or would you react impulsively and risk losing control? Because the truth is, anyone can be loud. Anyone can react. Few can choose control, and in that choice, they become unstoppable. The room slowly exhaled. The tension that had gripped the restaurant just moments ago began to dissipate. Forks returned to plates. Conversations tentatively resumed. Music, once background, now felt like a gentle reminder that the world had not ended. But something had changed. Everyone in the room had witnessed something rare. Something almost impossible to teach. Steven Seagal sat back down. Calm. Unshaken. Controlled. His partner, still slightly trembling, settled beside him. Her eyes reflected both relief and awe. She had seen firsthand the invisible power of discipline and restraint. The man who had started the confrontation slumped in his chair, pulled back by his friends. His arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet regret. No one needed to speak. Everyone could see he had learned a lesson the hard way. No fists had flown. No one had been hurt. And yet, the message was clear. Power doesn't come from noise or aggression. Power comes from control. Steven took a deep breath and glanced around the room. Not with anger, not with pride, just awareness. A subtle reminder that calm and composure are far stronger than any impulsive reaction. Audience engagement question. Think about your own life. When someone tests your patience, do you react instantly, or do you pause, breathe, and choose control? This was the real lesson. The diners, initially shocked, began whispering to each other. Phones, once raised to record the chaos, now captured the stillness and control. The clips would spread quickly, not because of violence, but because of the restraint that had commanded the room. Steven's partner leaned closer. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I've never seen someone so calm, so in control." That night, the restaurant returned to normal, or as normal as it could after witnessing something extraordinary. Moral: the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, not the fastest, not the one who reacts first. The strongest person is the one who protects what matters most, without losing control. Steven didn't need to shout. He didn't need to strike. His calm presence alone had resolved a confrontation that could have spiraled into chaos. It's a lesson that goes beyond the restaurant, beyond fights, beyond public confrontations. Life will test you. People will cross lines. Challenges will appear when you least expect them. And in those moments, strength isn't found in anger. It isn't found in impulse. It's found in discipline, in patience, in calm authority. Audience question: if you were there, would you have the courage to stay calm, protect what matters, and act only when necessary? Or would you react impulsively? Moments like these remind us that control is power. Patience is strength. Silence can speak louder than any shout. Before the scene fades completely, remember: like this video if you believe real strength is discipline, not rage. Subscribe for more stories of calm authority overcoming chaos. Comment below: would you have had the patience and courage to handle it like Steven Seagal? Because the truth is simple: anyone can react. Anyone can be loud. But few can choose control, and that choice defines true power. By the next morning, the video clips of the restaurant were everywhere online. People weren't sharing it for a fight. They shared it for the lesson, the calm, the authority that stopped chaos without a single punch. The room had witnessed something unforgettable. And now, anyone watching could understand it too. Strength is measured not by how fast you act, but by how well you control yourself when action is needed most. Steven turned to his partner one last time, giving a reassuring smile. She smiled back, a mixture of relief and admiration. That night would not be forgotten, not for violence, but for mastery of restraint. Final engagement. If you respect true strength, type respect in the comments. Hit like if you believe calm is more powerful than aggression. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that teach real-life lessons about discipline, courage, and control. Remember, the strongest person in any room is not the one who shouts the loudest. It's the one who protects, stays calm, and acts decisively, only when it matters most.